My name is Cecilia Jarme. I am a professor and a researcher assistant at Universidad Nacional de Quilmes in Buenos Aires, Argentina. I work on recurrent neural network models, and this tutorial is to discuss different concepts related to recurrent neural networks, how to model and build them, and regarding the dynamics. So more or less, this is the idea of the tutorial. First, I will start with some motivation, and I want to tell you why recurrent neural networks are interesting. Then I will talk a little about the dynamics. And finally, we will work on some code. The idea is that when you finish the tutorial, you will have code and you can play with it, and you will have your recurrent neural networks that can achieve a very simple task, decision-making like task, and you will be able to have that code and modify it and use for whatever you want. So more or less, that's the idea. And if you have some feedback during this tutorial, please write on the tutorial channel at Discord, okay? So anything, whatever you want to ask, whatever you want to say, please write it there, because it is better for me. My English is not the best. If I am able to read the question and think a little before to answer, it's better for me, and it will be better for you, okay? Well, let's start for the tutorial with a little motivation. Okay, I still have people who is showing. Okay, well, this is the last. This is the last one. Perfect. Okay, so what is this tutorial or this talk about? The idea is that I want to talk about some concepts and methods to develop, in particular, recurrent neural networks and models that can be used to model biological neural circuits. And the field of my interest is computational neuroscience. The idea is that we can model, and also we will train the networks to achieve different tasks. And we will discuss some properties and some results related to the dynamics and other properties. And well, at the end of this, I will help you how to code all the things that we will talk about in there, okay? So, here. So, recurrent neural networks are very interesting models used in neuroscience research from a long time ago. So the idea is that they can be trained to process different kinds of information, in particular temporal information, and also can be trained to perform different tasks, like decision-making tasks. A simple recurrent neural network could perform tasks similar to some of the tasks that happen in the cerebral cortex. So they can be used to do, for example, stimuli selection, decision-making task, temporal pattern generation, and also to model motor control. There is a lot of papers regarding these four subjects. In particular, there is a very interesting paper for motor control where monkeys are trained to perform reaching tasks. And this was one of the first papers that I read about this model. And I started to think if I could do something from the theoretical point of view and something to understand the model that it's used to compare and to try to analyze the real data. So the second paper that I was interested in was the one referred to the computation of the cortex, referring to the context-dependent decision-making like task. That's the one that was very interested at the moment. And in fact, there is a new paper that adds information of this. It was from, I think, last month. And well, the idea is that they model kind of task that we have to integrate information from one kind of information, for example, motion, or the other that it's color, and we want to choose which information we want to integrate. But the selection, the decision of the integration of the task will be made depending on the context, and we will have a signal that represents that context. So if we have the integration of the signal when we have the context of motion, the result will be positive if the total value, absolute value of the signal is positive, or negative if it is negative. But if we have otherwise the color context, this will be the signal, that will be integrated. So this is a new paper that adds information regarding the mechanisms during the decision making. And it's very interesting. You can go and see that, like, I think it was 8 years from the previous paper, and they found a lot of very interesting information. But the motivation of the use of this model doesn't end there. We have, for example, a lot of models that have been used to describe working memory, for example. The models of recurrent neural networks are used to describe this process. Also, about the motor patterns, there is a lot of work regarding that. Temporal pattern generation and timing, and this is a very interesting field of study. Then we have, again, different signals, and the idea is that the output can be a representation of what happened depending on the different contexts. And then there is a lot of work that has been done regarding multitasking, where you can try to understand what happened in the brain, because we know that the brain does a lot of things at the same time. And there was a lot of work regarding the models trying to train networks to perform multiple tasks. And this is a very, very hard thing to do. And this paper is very interesting and refer about that field. So again, which is the model that we are discussing? It's a recurrent neural network. So we have like inputs that are our sensory information. And here we have some units that has set connections. And the idea is that depending on the certain rule that we impose, we will have decisions that our network makes. And these decisions can be seen as the result of the state of the output. That's the idea of the model that we will discuss. So we have these units, and we will try to see what happened with the activity of these units in terms of time. And to do that, we have a very classical model where we have an equation that rules the dynamics of n units that are interconnected in the network. So this equation, it's very well known, and originally it was used to model the state of the potential membrane of the neurons, and it has been used in a lot of works with different variants of the parameters representing different possible models. And the model that we show you, the value of H will be seen as the activity of a biological neuron or unit. It's a firing rate unit. And the idea is that we have a continuous variable that is saturating nonlinear fashion. So this equation will be nonlinear at the beginning. So as I said before, I have the activity is H, and then I have tau, that is the time constant of the system. We have our nonlinear function. We have the value of a signal that we put on the input and interact with our network using this matrix W in. And we will have the matrix that represent the interconnection of our units, W-rec. And then, as I said, we have this, that is the matrix that control the vector of the inputs. So, we start with this equation. And then we have the readout of the output, that it is the value of C in terms of another matrix that we call W out. And the idea is that that equation that I showed you before can be written in terms of vectors also, where the capital letters represent the vector with the value of all individual states of each unit. And then the idea is the following. We have a continuous equation there. So we want to go from the continuous to the discrete time. So we have the universal approximation theorem that says that a neural network with one hidden layer contains a sufficient but a finite number of neurons that can approximate any continuous function to a reasonable accuracy under certain conditions for the activation functions. That's the universal approximation theorem, and it has a lot of time that it have been in the field. And the idea is that this theorem was thinking for networks that were not recurrent, but then it was extended for recurrent networks. And the idea is that we can approximate dynamical systems using continuous time recurrent neural networks, and then we can discretize that networks. And this idea that we will use in all the following slides. So we will go to the continuous, from the continuous to the discrete time. Sorry, I'm very nervous because there is a lot of people that is still jumping and connecting to the tutorial, and I have to accept them. So sorry if you see that I stop, it's because there is a lot of people still connecting. So traditionally, the system represented by the equation that I show you first is approximated using Euler method that we do with a step time here, and I will consider for the following equations the time constant of the system equal to 1 millisecond, because everything that I will show you is of the order of milliseconds. And then we can think and rewrite the discrete time equation by doing Euler, such is the equation that we get. And then if we consider the time step equal to 1 millisecond, also the equation can be written here like this. And this equation is the one that we will use in our code. So the idea is that we will have a discrete time equation that represents, because it's an integration of the using Euler method of the equation that I showed you at first, with the approximation of using the time constant of the system equal to 1 millisecond and the step time equal to 1 millisecond. Okay. So which are the tasks that we will consider for training our networks? Well, these are time reproductions, that it means, I will show you what each of them means. And then we will see some logic gate operations, like binary operations, but with temporal stimuli. Then we will see a classical flip-flop task that it's equivalent to 1-bit memory storage. And also a oscillation that it is started with a stimuli. With a stimulus, and it's a finite duration oscillation. So it is an oscillation that ends in the considered time. So let's start with the time reproduction task. Here is the input in green, the expected output is in gray, and the predicted output, it means the value of that we obtain with our network, is the red color. So the idea is that when we have a stimulus in the input, the network has to reproduce it with a certain delay that is fixed. And if we don't have anything but noise, here you have that the green input has a little noise, the output has to remain silent. So that's the idea of the task. So as you can see, I show you different samples where the stimuli is present or not, and we train our network to reproduce that stimuli, that stimulus, sorry. So, which are the basic logic gate operations that we see? The idea is, for example, if we have the AND task, we need to have two simultaneous stimuli at each of the inputs. Here, the two inputs are represented with A and B, color green and pink. Again, the expected output is in gray, and the predicted output is in red. And the idea is that we have only one stimuli at the input. The output has to remain silent. And the same happens if we don't have any stimuli at the input. So as you can see, we succeed in training the network to accomplish the AND task, only react to the output, only react the output when we have two simultaneous stimuli. And the other task is the OR task that we train the network to perform this task. It means that if we have a stimuli in one of the inputs, it has to go the output to a high state. Only if we don't have any stimulus, the output has to remain silent. This is a very different task than this one, because in this one, we have to force the network to be silent when we have stimulus in individual inputs. And in this one, we ask the network to react whatever the stimulus is in each input. Then we also have a well-known task, SOR, or exclusive OR. That is a task where the output has to react only if we have one stimuli at the input, and it has to be silent if we have two simultaneous stimuli. So the tasks are different between them, and are temporal tasks in the sense that we want to study what happened with a time series. And the final task is a one input task, that is the NOT task. It means that if we have a stimulus, the output has to remain silent, and if we don't have any, the output has to go to high state. Sorry. So these are the tasks that we consider that we call a Boolean-like task. And the other one is the flip-flop task. This one is, as I will describe here, if we have one stimulus in the set input, the output has to go to the high state. And if we have a stimuli in the reset input, the output has to go to the rest state. So two consecutive stimuli in the set input does not change the state, and two consecutive resets also has not changed the state. So let's see, for example, the first square. Here we have one set signal, so the output goes to the high state, and then we have another stimuli and another stimulus, and the output remains in high state. And then when we have a reset signal, the output goes to the rest state. So if you take a look, this is a low edge triggered signal, because we have to wait. It was training to wait a couple of milliseconds to go and change the state. The idea is to emulate what would happen with a real system. You don't have simultaneous changes. You have some delay between the stimulus and the answer. So here is one case, here is another. I have a reset signal, so the output doesn't do anything. Then I have a set signal, so the output goes to the high state. And we train the network with a lot of samples with different cases. Just the idea is that the network learns the task. The flip-flop task means to memorize and keep the state until we change the stimulus of the input. So the other one that we considered was the finite duration oscillation. It means that if we have a stimuli in the input, the output starts to oscillate with a fixed value of frequency, and it does it during a finite time. Then, if we don't have any stimulus but noise, the output has to remain silent. That's that task that I described here are the one that I consider it. We consider it for our work. But then you have another kind of decision-making tasks that are very used in neuroscience, and particularly in computation neuroscience, such as this perceptual decision-making, where you have to integrate information. If the integration of the information it's a positive number, then the output take the high state. If the integration of the information it's a negative number, the output go to a low state. And this is a kind of perceptual decision-making task. But then, for instance, you have another kind of task called parametric working memory, where we memorize, the network has to memorize the difference height between the stimuli in the input. So if the difference is positive, then it takes a positive value that is proportional to the difference. And if it is negative, they take a lower value. So positive or negative, depending on which was the stimulus that was higher. It was the first one or the second one. So this is a kind of parametric working memory task. The other kind of task that we can consider is a delayed match to sample task, where we have to consider if we have two stimuli, one following the other in the same input, or if we have one stimuli in one input, another in the other input. So depending on that, if we have two stimuli in one input, then it takes the high level value. Otherwise, it takes the low level value. This is a delayed match to sample parametrization of the task. And finally, the one that I described, that was the first that I was interested in, that is the context-dependent decision-making, where I choose which of the signals want to take into account to make the decision depending on a context signal. So these are additional tasks that can be considered for the work. Let me tell you that with the code that I'm presenting here, you can do whatever of these tasks I present in the talk with a little work. You can modify the code and play and try to make your own parameterization of the task. So last year, we presented a small work in the conference, in the CNS conference, and that derived into a very interesting but short work on multitasking. And if you want to take a look, the idea is that I considered some of the tasks that I described before and try to combine them in one network that was able to learn simultaneously different tasks depending on the context signal. So the idea is that we have an input, different context, and depending on the context, the input produce, for instance, a memorization of the input, a time reproduction task, or for instance, an oscillation of the output. Then I consider three tasks and three possible contexts. And the idea is try to see what happened with the dynamics of the networks that can do such kind of task, but the same network can do it with different context. So you can go and see there is another work that is very interesting when people consider it a lot of tasks and a lot of possible that we will discuss some of these architectures. But you can go and see these people, I think they achieved to do like 20 different tasks for the same network. It's a very complex process. You can take a look at this. It's very amazing. But let's move now and talk about the training methods. So let me make a short pause to see if there is questions posted in the channel. No questions. Okay. Again, sorry for my English and for I was very nervous at the beginning. So if you have questions, please let me know. And if something is confusing, also let me know. Now let's discuss some about the training methods, and then we talk a little about the visualization and those kind of stuff. So the idea is that a lot of algorithms coexist to train recurrent neural networks. Some of them are unsupervised and some of them are supervised. In this work, I use supervised methods. Some examples of this, not of these, some examples of the algorithms are in the paradigm of reservoir computing, where modification of the weights are made only to the output matrix that I show you in the equations. And some methods related to this are, for instance, force method. I work with the standard backpropagation through time rule. I will show you some of this in the second part of the talk. And the idea is that the backpropagation rule allows the estimation of the gradient of the parameter functions of the network. And then I use some optimization method to minimize the gradient. And that is that I use. And it is very standard in machine learning techniques. So the idea is that we have a cost function or a loss function that is used to train the model. And in this case, it is the mean square error between the target function and the output of the network. It is defined like this. And as I said before, we have a lot of training samples, in this case, to make the network learn the rule. We have a data set that obeys the rule. And that data set is made with noise, trying to emulate what happens in a real circuit, because we don't have values of high state or low states with silence. We have always noise. And the idea is to make the network strong and robust against the noise. So then, to try to understand what happened with the connectivity of the network and then with the state of the outputs, we have to be able to use different visualization tools. Sorry, I have a typo here. The idea is that some of the visualizations that I showed you before and I will show you now are made with Python and Matplotlib. And for instance, a very easy visualization that one can make for the network is the recurrent wave matrix. Here is a recurrent wave matrix for a random normal initialization. And here is a weight matrix, but in this case, for a population where have excitatory and inhibitory units separated. So these kind of plots are very useful because one can show the value of the absolute value of the connectivity path between units. We have a postsynaptic and presynaptic values, and here the columns represent each unit. So if we want to get excitatory units, we will have columns with positive values or negative values. We can have a different kind of visualization, as complex as the things that we want to understand regarding the networks. There are a lot of possible software that we can use considering Python. A lot of libraries that make very nice plots. I use matplotlib, but Bokeh and another like Seaborn that I didn't name here are very interesting and allows to make a very cool graph and pictures and analysis in general. So the idea is that we can do different analysis. Here I show you, for instance, in the eigenvalue distribution for the weight matrix. So, for instance, we want, I'm sorry, I'm reading a question here. Can we, let me think about it a little. Can we use them when the input is not obvious, for example, for modeling brain oscillations? Yes, we can, but I have to think a little. We can feed the neural networks with data and try to understand different dynamics or rules. But let me think a little more about this, Esin. So if you want to copy your question to don't lose this, please put it on Discord, and then I will think a little about it and try to answer. So here we have, for instance, an example of an AND task. And the idea is the following. This is an AND task, that the one that I showed you before. But now I want to show you that we can try to understand what happened with the units, individual activity states. So we can, for instance, plot some of the units with the state of the output also. And we can try to plot something more interesting or complex. For instance, what happens if we apply dimensional reduction to the state of all the units? So if we try to apply this, the idea is that we will get some trajectory in the phase space. And we can do this using the different tools of Python and also matplotlib. So here is an example. We have a zero input value. Here I try to put the input with not noise, but the network was trained with noise. The idea is try to see the more precise trajectory in the phase space, but all the networks were trained with noise. Here we have another one. This is another example. We have, in this case, what happened when we have one stimuli only. And here we have another network. The idea is the different network, and the values that you see here, you see 4 because we have 4 possible combinations for the input. And this is the first thing that I found that it was very interesting. We can get different dynamical states without any constraint of the network. If we only ask to the network to perform the task, the thing that we call the task-based approach, we can get different dynamical behaviors. For instance, in this network that I trained, I found that the network responds with oscillatory states for the stimuli in the input that has to be silent, because this is an AND task. So if we have only one stimuli in the input, the output has to remain silent. But the output state here, the silent state, is a state that it is obtained as the cancellation of all the oscillatory states of the input. So that I found that was very interesting, because it is not the same this state than the previous one, than this state, where the network doesn't have to react. So here, as we get stimulus in the input, the network has to react, but the way that it does it... Sorry,
run different visualization.
It was an open microphone. Okay, so this is the more or less the idea that if we start to try to visualize what happened with the network, we will discover different interesting behaviors, such this one. So again, if we try to analyze different tasks, for instance, flip-flop task, we can find that in different states, we can produce, for instance, here, let's see this one. We have the stimuli, and then the output go to the high state. Then when receives the second stimuli, the output has to remain in high state, but it is sensitive to the stimuli. So the network reacts, but try to compensate it and keep the output in the high state. And then when receive the reset stimuli, they also have to react. In this case, it's an oscillatory state. So if we analyze what happened with the value distribution, we will find, and you can see then in the preprint that I will reference, or I referenced before, I don't remember. You will see that the states can be associated with the values that are outside the unitary circle of the AEM value distribution. So it is very interesting to see that. Then we can study different things on the network, such as what happened if a network that was training with the stimuli always at the same timestamp has the stimuli previous of that timestamp or before that timestamp. So that's also interesting. Then we can study what happened, for instance, with the output when we try to change the time delay between the stimuli and the answer. And then what happened when we want to try to change the size of the network. Those kind of studies are very interesting because allows you to understand which is the size that is optimal to the process that we are studying. Sorry, let me see, I have another question. What are the PCA trajectories for the wave matrices? The PCA trajectories are not for the wave matrices, they are for the states, the different states of the input here. Let me show you. We have a stimuli or stimulus in the input, and then we study what happened with the dimensionally reduced space, not of the matrix, of the state, the H state of the output. Okay, sorry if it was confusing before. We can study the matrix and the connection and the distribution of the weight, but we can also study what happened with the activity. Here we try to study what happened with the activity. Okay, let me go further. Then we can try to study, again, in this case with the weight matrix, we can study what happens if we start to remove the connections in the trained networks, try to see which of the connections are relevant or not. And in this case, we choose the AND task and try to study what happens if we remove positive or negative, not units, but connections. If we remove a certain value of connections, changing the level of the maximum level of the connection that was removed, and try to see which is the percentage maximum able to be removed before the task completely destroys. So the idea is try to see how robust are the networks against removing different connections. And this is also an interesting study because that allows us to understand if some of the states or the answer of the networks are different to others. It's a damaged state. So if you want to see a little more on this work, it is currently under review. This is the preprint. And the idea is that we presented the results of a set of studies done on recurrent neural networks performing the tasks that I showed before. And a simple model with a small number of units, meaning between 50 and 100 of units, it's able to reproduce all of the tasks that I showed you before. And the idea is that in this process, we learn a lot about the model, because again, these models are used then for other laboratories and other people to try to represent and understand what happened with the dynamics of the real data. So a lot of times you see that there is a work published in very, very high profile journals where people is working and comparing the states of the real data, the state of the outputs, and PCA's analysis done on the real multi-recording signals against neural network models, recurrent neural network models. And the idea is that we wanted to show that we have to be very careful for the dynamics that we get when we train them, because the same task could be achieved in multiple ways, and does not necessarily represent what is happening in the brain. So it is very, very good if we are able to characterize well the models that we use, again, to make predictions. So the idea is that to try to understand the better, as better as possible, the models. Okay, some other results are related to the things that I said before. Also, to understand the properties of the networks performing simple tasks allows to train them then to more complex ones. And the idea of studying the capacity of such models also very useful to show the limitations, in particular the ones that are related to time scales, because again, some of the problems of the recurrent neural networks are related to the limitations in the training regarding the time scale when you have a long-term dependencies. So I will stop a little just to ask you if you are okay, if you understand what I said, and if you have questions. And if you can then write it in the tutorial channel, it is better. So everything's okay? Otherwise, please let me know. Okay, it is helpful to have a different... Oh, okay, could be useful, yes, but as you will see, to have a different tau values in the same network, it's a little complicated with the model that I will show you, but it is interesting in some cases when you have models that have neurons with different time scales. Here, I considered that all the units have the same time scale. Oh, thank you very much, Ayush. Thank you. Yes, I will be available later. Yes. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, PCA again. I did not understand. Did you do it with the individual activity of the neurons? Yes, I took the vector that represents all the activity of each neuron in my network, and then I use all the time series that it's okay, it is a time series that it's let's say 300 milliseconds long, and then you have a multiple. Let's say if you have a 50 units, you will have a 50 time series, and then with those time series in the interval of 300 milliseconds, I applied a PCA, and the idea is try to see if there is a dynamical object or behavior, and you will see in this second part that it is a very common thing to do. Okay, perfect. You will see just in a few slides that it is a very common thing to do. How you decide how many neurons units to have in the model architecture? It is a very interesting question. I started by doing this like an error and try method. The idea is that I propose a task and try to see if I can train the network. And then you can go in different ways. You can choose, let's say, a lot of units, like 200 or 500. It's a lot of units and a lot of parameters. It will take time. And then you can go back and try to reduce the number as much as you can and see if the network is still able to learn the task with a good accuracy. So I learned for those tasks that I show you that between 50 and 500 units, you can achieve that with a very nice performance. So I started by reading what the people does in the models. So more or less, I understood that as the people can measure of the order of hundreds of units in the experiments, they were comparing it with models with 100 of units sometimes. So I try to do that. That's the way that I decided. Also, a very important constraint was my computer. I'm doing this with my laptop with a CPU and NVIDIA. So I cannot do very, very large networks. So also was a constraint to start to understand the problem. Okay? Okay. So talking about the dynamics, which is the second part of the talk, the idea is that there are a lot of work done linking the connectivity of the network, the dynamics, and the computation. This is one of the works that is very interesting. And you will see that in my tutorial, I like to put a lot of references because it doesn't matter what I said. It matters what the other people has been doing such a long time ago. So it took me a lot of time to find all of this work and try to understand the different path of the field of recurrent neural networks. So if you are interested, please go and see the works because the idea is that there are a lot regarding the population activity, the dynamics, the connectivity, and the models are very, 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 very old, some of them. And we have been using the same model for over 30 years. But the difference is that we now can use more units, we can use new software, and we can perform the task very, very nicely. So another work that was very interesting, and we started with this, was the one that the Susilo and Barak make an analysis, a dynamical analysis of networks training to perform different tasks, such the ones that I described before. In this case, they choose a task that they call flip-flop. But later, I understood that there was not a flip-flop. It was a register. It was a 3-bit flip-flop because it is a register. It's a 3-bit memory. And they try to linearize and understand the dynamics behind this, trying to make a fixed point analysis. And okay, the idea, I'm going fast in this part because I just discovered that the equation moves to the side. But the idea is that if you read this paper, we'll find that they made a very nice and interesting analysis on the dynamics. And they found at the end that the memory states of the register can be found in the PCA space as points of the PCA space, and you can achieve them going in the different trajectories. So I asked myself if it was possible to reproduce this without doing all the dynamical analysis. If I train the network with the task that they choose, if I will find also a cube with the memory states, meaning the memory states is this. if we have a flip-flop, a 3-bit flip-flop, meaning a register task, we can have 8 different states depending on the output. That was what I meant. So those states, meaning those different values at the output. In this case, the output is not one channel; it is 3 channels, and they found these 8 input states. So I try to do the same, and in fact, I made a tutorial where I explain how to perform this. And the idea is that if you train a network with the flip-flop in this case, the 3-bit flip-flop task, you also will find the cube with the memory states without doing anything weird. It is, in fact, very, very easy to achieve the state of the cube. And if you train multiple networks, you will find the same 8 memory states, but perhaps such different networks can achieve the same task with different weight distributions. You will find this cube, maybe it's rotated sometimes in some of the axes. So it is interesting to go and do that. So as the dynamics of the recurrent neural networks was better understood, there was last year a very interesting review trying to get together all the information, and I recommend you to go and read this review because it show you different meaningful states that you can achieve studying producing different dynamics. And I really enjoy this paper because I found that some of the results fell into one of the described categories. And again, a very, very nice recommendation to go to see this. And regarding the training networks, the idea is that you can understand better the dynamics and the connectivity by studying, on one hand, the matrix that I showed you before, and the weight distribution. On the other hand, you can go and study what happened with the activity of the outputs. So these are 2 different things. Here we have a connectivity study where we try to understand the recurrent weight matrix in terms, for instance, in this analysis of the eigenvalue distribution. Or you can go and try to see what happened with the activity and which are the offsets that you get in the PCI space, for instance. So as I showed you before, for different tasks, you can study what happened with the dynamics. Also, for the same task, you can obtain different dynamical behaviors. And that's something that, for me, it's amazing. And you can go and try to classify the eigenvalue distribution and try to see if you could relate the different parents with the different activities. And some of the things that we found is that the values that are outside the unitary circle represent different modes of the output. So, for instance, let me show you. In the case of AND task, you need to have at least one value outside the unitary circle to represent the state where the output goes to high value. You can have one or you can have more, and those extra eigenvalues outside the circle will not be elicited with the output state in the input. So it is very interesting. Again, we can go and try to make an analysis of the dynamics, trying to decompose the recurrent weight matrix in its eigenvalues, and try to write the activity in terms of the input excitation state. And if you do that, you will understand that you can represent the state of the output in terms of the eigenvalues of the recurrent weight matrix with some approximations. And it is interesting because if these values are real, you will get a fixed point kind of solution where the output is obtained combining fixed value states. And if you get complex values, some of the output states will be represented or get it with oscillatory states, of course. And then you can estimate the frequency of the oscillatory dominant states by considering the real and imaginary part of the maximum value of the dominant eigenvalue state. So this is very interesting. And now let's think and try to move to neural networks from the machine learning point of view, because these two fields have been connected for a long time. So I found a lot of interesting papers trying to link and try to use all of the things that has been learned in machine learning to improve the current models that describe the brain. So some of them are weird and are not easy to understand the justification of why some things are useful to make predictions on the brain, but some others are interesting and honest, and you can go and take a look at them and tell me what you think. And I found this one in particular that it's very interesting to go to see what is available in the field of artificial neural networks to try to understand the brain. So a lot of people working and making different efforts to make frameworks that are easy to use for the scientist without learning to code a lot. And this is one that I found recently that makes some of the tasks that I described before. And it's interesting, and you can go and download it and use it because it has a lot of predefined tasks and a lot of pipelines where you can go and choose to make your own experiment. So it is not my idea to do this. My idea is try to show you and to explain that it is possible to teach you to make your own code with a very, very simple ideas. If you have some basic knowledge of Python, you will see that it is possible somehow to go and learn how to parameterize your own tasks. So they made a comparison between the model and previous models and also Keras. I will show you that some of the red things that are here, I think they are not true because you can go and use Keras to do a lot of things that they say they cannot, except for PyTorch because it is a different language that it is not supported by Keras. Keras is supported by backend TensorFlow. So, but some of the red lines here, I think are not true at all. So, in the field of artificial neural networks, we have something that it is our input values, some operation, and some threshold that allow us to obtain the value of the output. And the idea is that in artificial neural networks, you can combine different blocks of neurons to obtain structures that allow you to make different tasks. Now, I'm not referring to neurospine task. I'm now saying that you can do whatever task you want, and this is a guarantee for the universal approximation theorem. If you do it well, you can approximate whatever behavior you want, including a lot of classification tasks. So, which is the idea? Let's move a little let's move in the direction of the perceptron. So, let's think for a moment that we have a neural network, but here we have a unit that receives information of the inputs, and we have an input vector from x1 to xn. These are the weights. We have an operation, an integration, and the value of the output. And this equation explains us how to write the state of the output. In this case, consider a bias term which is not written explicitly here, but it explains how we can build the state of the output, combining the inputs with weights and also the nonlinear function, which is also not written explicitly here. The idea is that the equation that I showed you before can be written in vector terms. And this is important because these equations then are written in terms of the code, and we can make a mapping, and we can use all the available software, TensorFlow software, to write what happened with the layers of the network. The activation function are different depending on the network and the task we want to do. And again, I mean the task in machine learning. The activation function would be different. Here is, for example, a sigmoid function. You can get access to different functions that are predefined in TensorFlow and Keras. It's just simple align that allows you to choose between different activation functions. But in fact, you have a lot of them. And if the function is not implemented in the library, you can go and write it yourself. So we have a simplified perceptron. We can go from the representation that I showed you before to this one. And that's important because later we can go and combine different perceptrons in layers to obtain a recurrent neural network. So, okay, a person is adding to here. Okay, so here we have a single neural network with one layer. So we have the input, the layer which is called the hidden layer, and the output. Again, the problem is very similar of the problem that we had before. We want to find the network ways that minimize the lower value of the loss or cost function. But in this case, let me go back. But in this case, the cost function will depend on the kind of task that we were interested in. For example, if we want to train a neural network to make a classification task, we will use a cross entropy function. If we want to make some kind of prediction task, we will use mean square error, as I'll show you that I used it before. So if let's, for example, think that we have just two weights, just to be able to make a graph of the situation and try to understand. Remember that in a neural network, we will have something that we cannot make a graph of it because we have a lot of weights. In our case, I show you a network with 100 of units. So if we have 100 of units, we will have 100 per 100 of connections. So it means weights, 100 times 100 plus the input connection values plus the output connection values. So as you can see, there are a lot of parameters to be obtained with our model. So this is a very nice simplification of the problem where we have two weights. So the idea is that we start in a random value of the parameters, and we move in the plane that represent in this case, in the surface that represent the variation of the parameters. We try to go and see and compute the gradient and try to go in the opposite direction of the maximum growth of the gradient. And we repeat this until we find the lowest value. So as we found the lowest value, we will find the parameters that better represent our problem. So the idea is that in the minimization gradient problem, we initialize the parameters random. We compute the gradient and update the value of the weights. And again, we came back and do this until we find the, okay, I thought that I had a question, sorry. So this more or less the idea. But we have to be very careful because a small change in one of the weights affect the cost function. So we repeat this for the network and for all the layers, and it's a very, very, very complicated operation. But luckily, we don't do this. All this is done by TensorFlow, which it is only a very, very interesting library who knows how to estimate gradients and derivatives. So that's nice. It only knows how to apply chain rule and apply different minimization mechanisms. So one of them is used, or it is called learning rate algorithms that moves the value of the gradient, adjusting the value with a learning rate. And you have a lot of algorithms already implemented in TensorFlow, so you can go and choose which is the better for you. And the nice of these algorithms, it is that each of them it follows with a small citation or reference for the paper, and it makes you feel good because you can go and see which is the one that it is better for your kind of problem. So which are the kind of problems that the people of the field of machine learning is interested in? So one of the problems, in fact, I'm referring to recurrent neural networks, which are the things that you can do with recurrent neural networks in the machine learning field. And some of the problems that are interesting are related to time series and text sequences, for instance, speech or any kind of sound analysis, everything that is related to time series. So that's the point of interest of machine learning in recurrent neural networks. So the idea is that to model sequence, you have to be able to model different length of the sequence, and you have to be able to track long-term dependencies and try to keep the information of the order of the time series. And all the parameters that you use in your networks are shared across all the sequence. You will not change the network parameters for different values of the sequence. All the parameters are the same for the time series. So this is the approach that it's used to model sequential problems. So, for instance, you can have different kind of problems where you have an input and an output. This is more or less the problem that is somehow like the one that I described you before, where you have, for instance, the time reproduction task, or the oscillatory task also. When I was describing the bioinspire task, this is the more or less the kind of one-to-one manner that you have. Also, you can have a different kind of problem where you have a lot of inputs, and then you want to make a kind of classification, and then you have a lot of inputs and one output that say you something related to the value of inputs, or then you can have a lot of inputs and a lot of outputs, and this is called many-to-many. And this is a way to separate the kind of problems that you could have in machine learning. So again, and then when I show you this, you will see and say, okay, it's more or less what you described it in the first part of your talk. And yes, that's the idea. You will have input vector, output vector, and the hidden state that it's our activity vector. Yes, our activity value. So the idea is that you have a value of the activity, which is the result of our activation function to the previous state and the state of the input. That's very interesting. So, as you can see, this is the same as I showed you before. You have the output and a matrix that makes you a combination of all the activity values and gives you the output. This is a matrix, the output matrix. Then you have an input matrix, and you have a recurrent way matrix. So this is the same, just the same that I described before in our model. This is why a lot of machine learning frameworks can be used to describe recurrent neural networks, because this structure is the same. So the idea is that we can unroll the recurrent neural networks for, here we have for x time, xt value, and then we can see for each time value of the sequence, okay, where we have a connectivity weight for each one, and I'm sorry, here. And then you have this representation and each of the time steps and the value of the matrix that give you each of the time steps of the output. So the idea is that here we use something called backpropagation through time for train the network, and it allows you to go from the last value to the first one and update all the weight of the matrices. And the way that we do it is such that we minimize the difference between the value of the output, the mean square error, sorry, between the output and the desired output. So when we do that, when we apply those methods to recurrent neural networks, sometimes appear different problems, and they're very common when we start to train them. So some of the problems are very, very classical and have been studied for a long time. One of them is the vanishing gradient problem, and it means that when we are doing all this chain rule deviation, the value of the gradient starts to make it really, really small, and in some moment we lost track of the value of the gradient for the time steps that are very, very long, very, very far away of our state, of our current state. So this introduce a lot of problem because it's during the gradient estimation. So if we cannot properly estimate the gradient, we cannot properly minimize it. So that it's a very, very complex problem. Another problem is that we can have a, another problem is that we can have a very, very large value of the gradient. So again, it is a problem because it's in the other sense, and I will discuss then about it. But the most common problem is the shrinking of the gradient. In fact, it happened to me at the first tries that I did. now I know how to analyze it and to understand if I will have this problem or not. So some of the ways to solve this problem is to choose properly the activation function. But we have to be careful because some of the activation functions are not interesting if we are thinking on recurrent neural networks from our modeling of the brain. So if the way to solve the problem does not represent or affect the representation of our model, won't be useful for us. So we have to evaluate if we can go and change the activation function, and if this has some sense to be doing. Another way, it is related to the initialization of the weight matrix previous to the training. So this is a very interesting thing, and I did it. And if you initialize the matrix, for instance, as diagonal matrix, you will get better results in terms of training. But again, sometimes initialize the matrix like this doesn't have any physical meaning for our network. So maybe a very useful solution, but sometimes it does not represent anything that we're interested into understanding. So you have to be careful. This works very, very nice. Another way to solve it, and in fact, I saw this in recurrent neural networks use to brain modeling, is to change the architecture. Not use anymore a simple recurrent neural network, but use different kind of architectures that are more complex in terms of that this kind of networks has more parameters and are not describing the equation that I show you in the first slide that we discussed the model. But sometimes these models are also useful to describe some aspects of the brain. But we are going in a field that I cannot say that it's good or bad, but it is different that try to understand the original equation that I show you. So if you see some papers where they use LSTM or GRU units, take into account that there is not a physical or biological justification to use this. Some of the people says that some gate units can appear to be some part of the brain, but I don't know about that. So you can go and take a look to those papers. So in summary, recurrent neural networks are very, very useful to model sequences, and they can be trained with backpropagation through time, as I will show you in the code part of the tutorial. And gated units allow you to track better the long-term dependencies, and that's why they are, in fact, the units that are used to model time sequences. And this kind of model include, for instance, music generation, classification problems, machine translation, and other problems that I don't know about it, but all related to temporal sequences. So in this part of the tutorial, we try to be more practical and go to the details that will allow you to run your code. So the idea is that let's first start from some generalities, such as how do we train our network using the data. And in fact, this is a very common thing. You have all the data here, and then you have to split the data. Some of the data you will use for training, and some of the data you will use for testing. In some cases, the training data is also divided in a subset called the validation data. So let's start with a simple way to do it. So the training data is most of your data. This could be, let's say, for instance, reading data, or could be, for instance, samples that you created to train your network. So if you're creating samples to teach your network to do some task, then you need to keep some of the samples that are different of this to testing. So please remember, do not use the same data for training and for testing. And invalidation means that you use some of the training data later to, for instance, change some of the hyperparameters. Let's say if you want to study different network size or different configurations or those kind of stuff. So here you have the definition for each of the tests that I showed you before. And to do the training, to do all the part of the code, we will use Python. Well, we can work with Python. Well, you know, we can work locally if you have Python installed in your computer, regarding if you have Linux, Windows, or Mac, you can use it. And if you have a lot of things installed in your computer and you want to try something new, my recommendation is to use a virtual environment. Why is that? Because maybe you are doing, let's say, your PhD work and you want to try new things, but the software that you have there has to use certain libraries, and the software that you install that is new to try to play has to use other libraries, and it asks you to update something. And then you go, if you don't use a virtual environment, you can break all your previous installation of your software that you are using. So my recommendation is that if you are going to try to use new libraries, such as TensorFlow and Keras, if you are not using them yet, go and see how to make a virtual environment and put everything in this new virtual environment and play there. Especially if you are a PhD student or master student that is working on a project. So please do this without breaking anything previous. Another option is that if you don't want to go and install something, you can go and play a little with Google Colab. Let me make a little poll. Who previously used Google Colab? Could you post in the window who is familiarized with Google Colab? I think most of the people is now familiarized with such platform. Yes, someone said yes, someone more. Who know what is Google Colab? Who previously used it? No one more? A little bit. Okay, a little bit is enough. Perfect. Me too. Perfect. I know, but I use it only in tutorials. Yes, it's very easy to use it for tutorials. Yes, yes. Okay. Now I will show you that we can use it for this tutorial, but also we can use it to run some little projects. So it's particularly interesting because sometimes I have to run some simulations on my computer, but I need to run other simulations. And even when the free version is a little slower, you can go and use it to borrow computers and do some very interesting stuff. So we will use today Google Colab. So if you still want to install something in your computer, one very nice option is go and install Anaconda distribution, because it has a lot of things that you can use. For instance, you can go and install it to use the IDLES interfaces, for instance, Jupyter Notebooks, or you can use it for the different scientific computing libraries or visualization tools, or even some machine learning libraries. So it is a very interesting option if you want to go and install it in your computer. But again, I recommend to you, if you are going to do this, you have to do it in a virtual environment because the idea is to do not broke anything else. So, for instance, if we want to use scikit-learn, let's say why and how we can use it. So let's say that we have a set of data, collected data. So scikit-learn allows to perform different tasks. For instance, classification, or clustering, or regression, or dimensional reduction, such the one that I will show you in our code. Dimensional reduction is used for a lot of things. I use it to show you in the variance reduced space the behavior of our training network. Then you can go and see that scikit-learn has a lot of algorithms, very, very useful. So how do we implement, let's say, a neural network or an algorithm or whatever you want to do? You can go and use the math libraries and Python from zero without any knowledge of the libraries that I showed you before. This is very hard. I hardly recommended it. Maybe if you are trying to learn the theory behind some of the algorithms, it's interesting to do this. But otherwise, I recommend to you to go and use some dedicated frameworks. For instance, in the case of neural networks, go and learn how to use TensorFlow, Keras, or even PyTorch, whatever you want. The options that I'm showing here are all open source, and the idea is to not pay for software. Most of the cases we can do it, so that's the main motivation. So some of you are from very, very large and important labs, but others are from low income labs or independent. So these are very, very nice options and are all open source. So what is TensorFlow? Basically, it's a lot of things, but particularly it's a collection of libraries, mainly a very, very nice tool to derivate. That's the main thing. But you have a lot of things made in machine learning and pipelines and stuff, so you can go and explore the website. It's overwhelming, but it is very, very interesting. Then you have Keras, that now it's incorporated to TensorFlow. It's a high-level API, so it is written in Python, and you can go and build neural networks very, very easy. And I will use this to build neural networks, recurrent ones, and show you how to train them. So as I said before, now Keras is inside TensorFlow. So documentation of Keras is embedded in the TensorFlow documentation. And basically, the interesting things on Keras are the possibility of make modular software, all the libraries with a lot of different cost function, optimizers, activation function, different regularizations, ways, a lot of things that are already written. The code is already there and very, very nice documented. And there are a lot of sheets like this where you can find the basic examples to build a model. I will give you my slides, so you will have this one, but there are different sheets that you can use. And let's say a very, very nice and short example first, and then we will go to the part of coding. So you can create a sequential model, and the idea is that this sequential model, you have first, as in any Python code, you have to import the libraries that you are interested in. And then you define your model. In this case, you define it as sequential. You define the layers. You define the layers of your model, the type of activation function, the number of units of your following layer, and the activation function of your following layer. In this case, here we have 1, 2 layers with each one with its corresponding activation function. So if you want to learn more about deep learning and neural networks and keras, it is very interesting, the course of the MIT, and it is open and it is free, and the videos are posted there. Another way to learn is to go to the documentation of TensorFlow, because it has a lot of examples, and then you can run the examples in Colab. And the same is true for keras. If you go to the website of keras, even when the documentation is inside TensorFlow, I think the keras site is very useful, and you can go and take a look there, because it is very, very clear, and it has also examples. So thank you for listening. Now we will move to the part where we will code a little. So if you go to, I will give you some time, you can go to Discord and see the link that I posted, where you will find the Google Drive link, and you can go to that link and open it, and you will find different directories. So I will close the presentation and stop to share that screen, and I will share the screen. Okay, perfect. So here you find 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 files. And then you will have this one that says plots and this one that says weights. Okay? So it is important that you copy the directory as I copy the directory here with these files inside. So first of all, I will show you the main notebook, that it is the one that you have to run. This is the code that we will run, and this code is called by train 1 or train 2, and this train 1 or 2, it is the code called by this loop. So it is called loop to call because you can make a loop where you can create a lot of networks if you want. Sorry, do we have access to these documents in Drive? Yes, I posted on the tutorial channel here. Do you want? Suppose that you can go and see it on Discord. Yes, yes, yes. Yes, thank you. Taylor, thank you. Yes. Please let me know if you have access. It's supposed that I configure it for everyone can access and read it. Ah, you don't have Discord. Okay. Okay, you have the link here. Sorry, I posted the link in Discord. Yes, use the one above. Yes. Perfect. Okay. So I will wait one more second and please tell me if someone else has problems to find the files. Everybody could access to the Google Drive space. Okay. Otherwise, let me know. Okay, I will. Perfect. The idea is that you can run it whenever you want, but I wanted to show you how to use it. So I will open this file, that it is the notebook file here with Google Collaboratory. Okay, it's a step-by-step that I will show you. Okay, okay, it's slow, sorry. Ah, it's open in a new window. Sorry, I had to share the new window. Otherwise, you won't see what I'm seeing. Okay, I will stop presenting and then I will share the new window. Sorry, I didn't realize that. Okay, here. Here. Okay, perfect. So let's start by the basics. Here in the first part, I am importing the libraries that I need to run my code. This is the system library, the first one, and these two libraries are used to be able to mount the content of my disk to the drive. And here you have to be careful because you have to see the path where you have your drive. In my case, is this one. In some others, my drive is called different. I recommend to you that open the file part to see whatever the files are mounted or not then. And if you take a look here, this is bash code. If you want to use bash code in Google Colab, you have to use this symbol. Otherwise, it does not run. So this terminal, Google Colab, understands Python. And if you want to, you can use bash, but you have to use this. So here I'm copying the content here to the drive because I needed to execute the code. And as I will start with the exclusive OR training of the network, I copy this one, and this is commented. The other one is commented, and the one that it's used with exclusive OR goes with the one that is called training XOR 01. So this is the sample generator, and this is the training code. Okay, we need both. The sample generator is the one that I will use to generate the samples to train the network. And this is the one that will produce the networks. Then, okay, if you want to run local, you have to do this. And here, from the file, I will import everything. And this time, you can use it or not, because I wanted to estimate the time that it takes to train one network or the set of networks. So I imported this library because I use it later. So here are the definitions of the files that I will use to save the trained network, and also to save some plots that I will do to check the evolution of the network. So we have the first one, the weight to be saved in this file, and the second one is the space to save the plots. So this is a very simple loop that it will generate as much networks as we want to put here. For instance, if I put here 2, it will generate networks called 0 and 1. So this one that is called n vector, it is here. It says that it will produce network with 50 and 100 units. So I will produce 2 of each one. If you want to produce more, you change this number. If you want to produce a network with another number of units, you add in this vector file. You can, for instance, if you want to produce only networks with, let's say, 200 units, you go and, 200 units, you go and do this. Okay? So that's the idea. And something more that I want to clarify is that if you run over and over the code and you don't change this number, it will overwrite the previous networks that you generated. So you have to be careful with that. So the idea is with this loop, it will call the code to train recurrent neural networks in the exclusive OR task and the one that generates the samples. And it will generate as much as we want to use from units and for networks. So here, it modes, I already tested the code, so it's supposed that works perfectly. If the code does not work for you, you have to go and check the names that you are using here and the name of your Google Drive. Otherwise, the code will be working. So here, it shows you only 10 of all the sample that it generates, okay? So after the generation of the samples, here it says it took some time to generate the networks. You will start to see each epoch of the training. So as you move further with the training, you will see that the loss function here, it's a metric of the loss function. This value will be reduced in each iteration as much as it will be possible to find a solution for our problem. So when you finish, you will find, okay, a very low number. Sometimes it goes back to a high value, but don't worry, then for these samples that I give you, it corrects itself. So the idea is that when you finish to train all the networks that I gave you, at the end, you will be able to see here. This is a code that I ran. You will be able to see here, okay, the values were like this because I took a lot of time between the input and the answer, but you can change this value. I will show you how. When you finish, you will see the results of your trained network in the testing data set. And you will see the evolution of the loss in each epoch. So this is what you will see when you run the code. So now I will show you what is inside the code. And if you change how to change this value to make it more like the one that I show you in the presentation. Okay? So you have this. Let's go now to see the code. So I will open one tab again. Sorry, I need a little time because, okay, I will show you how to train the solve function. Just give me a minute. I'm opening it. Just a minute. Now I show you my tab. Okay, here. Perfect. So let me know if you can see it okay. Otherwise, I can go and do this and make the code bigger or smaller, whatever you want. Can you read it okay, like this? Okay. Well, entonces, let's see. The first part is the same as always. We will import all the functions that we need to the code to be running properly. Okay? And here, I will import the dataset generator. It means that this is the function that creates the pseudo data that I will use to train the network to be an exclusive OR network. So here, this part, you can also ignore it. It is a part that I use to stop the training if the result is good enough. So you can use it or not. You can choose whatever time you want or number of epochs you want to use to train. So here is the code properly set. Here is the sample size that I will use for training. In fact, I use 50,000 samples to train, and 50 of them I will save for testing. This is the number of epochs. It means the training instance. And this gap means the value of the space that I will use between the input and the stimulus, between the stimulus and the response. So here, also you can ignore this because we will say about this later. But here you will set that my code is fully commented to you to be used and modified. This first one is the trial generator. So here you generate the 15,000 samples are generated here. And then here is the network model construction. So we started with making the seed equal to none. It means that for each of the instance that we will use to build different networks, all the seeds will be different and all the networks will be different. If you here fix a number, all the networks that you create will be almost identical. So here is to make a different seed for each network. Okay, let's start the network extractor. Here we start the model, calling it like this, sequential, and then we add the layers that we need. The first layer is the recurrent neural network, where we define the number of units. Here it's defined with this variable that it is defined in the code that we use in the loop to make networks of the size that we want. So this number is one value of the vector that I showed you previously. Here you set the different states of the network. For instance, here it means that it will give you back the state of the outputs it means the activity for each network. Here it means that you will use a bias term as the one that I show you in the presentation. This is the input shape. This is the length of the time series or time series, more than one. And this is the number of inputs. So if we have an exclusive OR task, we will have two inputs, means two vectors of the same length. Then here we have some initialization parameters. You can go and play a little with the way of initialize the function. Here it means it says orthogonal, but you can go and change it. As I said before, if you here put, for instance, identity, you will initialize the recurrent wave matrix with the identity matrix. And you can go and see in Keras or in TensorFlow that you have different ways of do this, different initialization functions. Then you have the activation function. As I previously showed you, you can choose between a lot of them. Here I chose the one that I show you in the model. It's an hyperbolic tangent. And then you can initialize also the bias term, whatever you want. Here I did it with a 0 vector. Then when you finish with the definition of the recurrent neural network, simple recurrent neural network, you can go and add the output layer. This is the one. It has one unit because we have only one output. It's the one that takes the decision between high value state and 0. This is the one that I showed you before. And when you finish the model construction, then you have to go and compile the model. Okay? And then when you finish the part of the compile, when you compile the model, you have to do two things. On one side, define the optimizers that you will use. One of them, there are different possible optimizers. Okay, I will use one of them. In this case, I define 3 because I give you you can change them. So then when you define your optimizer, you can go to the part of the training of the model. So first, you compile the model. So you choose first your cost or loss function, your optimizer, and your sample weight mode. And here I have something that is very useful. It's a way to save all the instance of the training, meaning that I have the initial value of the network here, how I started with each network, and each instance of the training, meaning that if I have 20 epochs of training, I will have 20 networks saved. You can choose whatever if you want to save only the last or all the networks to see the process. You can choose that one. I give you only the possibility to do this. And then I define these callbacks that are things that allow you to monitor the different states of the, for instance, in this case, the metrics that you will use to take some decisions, such as stop the training. Okay, so when we have this model here, sorry, there's a typo here. It has to see model compiling here. Okay, so here I save to the drive. Now everybody will have, oops. Okay, perfect, here. So when you finish to do this, now you properly train the network. This line is the network training. So model.fit means that you will train the network. And if you take a look here, it says these are the sets of X values, meaning input values, and its corresponding output values. And here you can see that I started in 50, from 50 to the end of the sequence, from 50 to the end of the sequence. So why I do that? Because I save the first 50 values to testing. So I train the network with only the 50,000 samples. Then, when I have all the fitting done, I have all the networks trained, I can go and test my model. So I defined a dataset that I will use for testing. So are the other 50 samples that I didn't use here. So as you can see, I go from 0 to 50, and here I'm going to 50 from the end of the sequence of samples. So I here do some printing just to see the shape of the data and try to understand if I have it properly written, or I have to or I have to transpose it. So here you have the definition of the graph that I show you in the presentation. So you have all the definition of the graph and a way to save it. So I ask a name for each file and each network here, and I save the file in the directory that I defined previously. So which are the plots that we are doing? Here we have one of the input, the other one, the target output, and our prediction made with our network. Then you can go also and print some keys, meaning some values of the model. And here you can go and make some plots about the evolution of the training. I also did it. And you can go here, I save some meaningful values, such as the distance between the value of the output expected and the output estimated. So this is more or less all the code for training networks to perform the exclusive OR task. I promise to you that the code works, so you can go and run it and play a little with it. And it is very easy to use. If you want to modify something of the data sample generator, I will show you a little bit of it. And the other code for the other task. No, come on. Okay, tell me which is your problem in Colab. I will help you. It's sometimes it's not easy, but if you show me the error, I can say to you what you can do. I need the error code to help you. So if someone, you have to copy. Yes, you cannot. Yes, you have to copy the path to your Google Drive. Otherwise, it will not work. You have to copy. Okay, you have your individual copy. Okay, it says content not such file or directory because you cannot copy. Another thing that I want to say to you, as read only. Yes, I copy them to my own Google Drive, but still things are. Let me see something. I have to change the folder names in your. Yes, you have to change the folder names. No. I think it's like Joel said. You have to change the names into your Google Drive names. Let me show you something. Okay. Let me show you. Oh, I'm sorry, I closed the window. Okay, don't worry. It's only the hardest part is that. If you can solve that part, you will be able to run the code. Don't worry. Let me show you. I'm just opening Google Colab space. I want to run it for you, just to show you. Okay, now here, let me share again. Okay. Okay. Let me read what happened with your second. Your drive, it's the same name that mine because I have a space in between and you don't. Maybe that's different in yours. You can take a look on that. And sometimes it not called my drive, it called different if you change the name. So let me show you what you will see when you succeed arranging the value of the state. Because if you cannot copy the code, it will not run. So if you go here and execute the code, you will see this. If you succeed and the code has not error, meaning that you are copying it properly, you will be able to see this. And you have to click here and it opens a new window. It doesn't show in the shared screen. So that I've gotten past that point. Okay, so you still experiment some problems, Caitlin? Please tell me. So if you pass that point, means that you have some of the things done properly. You can mount your code. Okay. No, okay. It is related to the copy of the files into the browser. If you, for example, put your code inside a different file, it will be different. You have to check that the code is where you are copying it. Because it says not such file or directory. I think it's a mistake with the location of the file. I'm pretty sure it's that. So for everybody else who is doing this, you have to allow Google to do a lot of things and put the code that it returns here. And then when you do that, it starts to mounting the code. It says the time that it took to generate the data set. Here I have my data set generated, and it starts to train the network. Okay? It takes a little time. It depends on the time and the availability. And here you will see that it is actually working. It's training the network. Okay? Perfect. So, as this is working, I can interrupt the execution here. Okay, I can say to you that the other code is the same, but with a one input task. It's the oscillatory task that I gave you. So please go play and try to solve the task. And you can post if you could succeed or not. Sometimes it takes a little time. Don't worry if you have some kind of issues, in particular to making work the part of the filing copying. It was I found that it was the hardest part. And please, if you have questions on it, if you want to talk about this tutorial, please post your comment on the Discord channel and let me know. I think it would be very, very useful if you play a little with the code and then you bring me asking me the different questions. Also, I will give you the slides. I think I will post it tomorrow, yes, because I want to see if there is another typo. And the slides has the links to the different preprints and publications. And if you want to go there, you can see that in each publication, I have a the GitHub code posted. So you can go and see in GitHub the code for all of the tasks that I'll show you that are published. So, or they are under review. So you can go and see and tell me what you think about it. Okay? So do you have questions, things that you want to talk about the tutorial? Which is the part where you're implementing backpropagation? Okay, let me show you the code. You mean in the code? I'm not implementing. No, don't worry. I'm not implementing it. TensorFlow is, and TensorFlow only implements backpropagation through time to estimate the gradient always. Then you only choose the minimization algorithm. I just got mine to work. Okay, perfect. Perfect. So you changed, perfect. Ah, I'm very happy. I'm very happy to hear that. Okay, so as said before, you can choose the minimization algorithm, but backpropagation through time is the way that TensorFlow estimates the gradient. We are not doing it explicitly. TensorFlow and Keras are doing it when you call the fit function. There is when it estimates the gradient using backpropagation through time. Okay? Okay. So I will answer all the questions that you want. I'm here. And in fact, if you use Python, you will find that this library is very easy to use. And I almost forget. If you click here, you will see the files that were properly copied. And if you want to modify something, do not forget to erase the file, because each time here you erase the file, because each time that you modify, if the file is copied here, sometimes it it does not copy again. Can you replace the optimization algorithm with customized plasticity rule? Not using Keras, but probably using TensorFlow. You can define your own algorithms using TensorFlow. So probably yes, but not in the code that I gave you. It is a little harder, but not impossible. But you need to learn a little more on TensorFlow. I never did it, but I know, in fact, that you can build your own rules. Force method, yes, yes. I was wondering if you know some paper where they compare both methods, backpropagation. Let me think about it. I don't know, because you see sometimes the people that learn force method came from a group that has been used it for a long time. So backpropagation, it wasn't useful some years ago. So the people of force method originally developed that because it was not possible to use backpropagation through time and minimization algorithms efficiently to train networks. It was very, very computational expensive. So they didn't follow that path. Now, with TensorFlow, PyTorch, and all the new things, now it is possible to do it, and maybe could be interested to compare those two. I will check on it, but I don't think I saw any of them. Could be interesting. Maybe take a look to the multitasking paper, but I think they use backpropagation through time. Maybe. Okay, but are very, very interesting questions. In fact, my former director used to use the force method. When I started to work in the university, I said to him, I want to use backpropagation because there is this library that I want to use. And he said, okay, but I don't know nothing about it. Do you use it sometimes? But force, no, I didn't. I didn't learn, in fact, how to code it. I know the method, but I didn't learn how to code it, and I don't remember it right now. But my former director used to work with it, and I in fact have some. I think it was some MATLAB code on it. And if you are interested in that method, I think that there is a paper from Susicho. I don't know. Yes, there is a new paper with code, very, very nice and explained code. I don't know if it's him or someone from his group, but it has notebooks and everything on GitHub where you can go and yes, if you know the paper, you can post it. Yes, maybe could be useful for others. Yes, the papers that I show, all the references are in the slides. But if I'm saying something, this is not in the slide, so you can post it. Yes. So, someone want to ask something else? And again, sorry for my very, very rustic English. I'm sorry, I'm very rusty. Okay. So if you don't have any other questions right now, perfect. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes. And in fact, that paper, it's interesting because the networks are a little different because those networks are capable of chaotic behavior, while the networks that I show you, not, they are not. Yes, there is code. Yes. They are not able to show chaotic behavior. That's important, and it's different. They are the completely deterministic networks. So if you want to train them to and still have chaotic patterns, you have to impose a different constraint on the weight distribution. Okay, that's important. So again, as I said before, if you want to ask something else, you can do it in the channel. And if you want to post other papers or comments or stuff, please go ahead. And also questions about the code. You can go and ask about the code, and I will solve the questions and try to answer. Okay? Okay. Okay. Okay, people, thank you very much for listening to my tutorial, and I hope it could be useful for you in any way. Okay? Bye, and thank you. And if you can write bye in the screen, would be very nice.